I first met Jennifer Zhu Scott actually at the last Crypto Finance Conference, and she was amazing. I have to say that she's going to take us on a journey from where we were to the future of crypto and the token economy. And apart from her work at Radian Partners, where she helps, other family offices, find investments that are relevant as well, she was been appointed by the World Economic Forum as their future blockchain council. Now, that's no pressure, right? Quite keen to know from her what they think and whether they've woken up and smelt the crypto. But she also rolls up her sleeves and gets hands-on advising projects such as the amazing render token. She told us about this at the last conference, which is how using blockchain you share the GPUs that are unused around the world for rendering for amazing film productions. That was just a terrific project. A fun fact, for those of you that watch that HBO show, I think it is Silicon Valley, she is a technical advisor. So if you've ever seen the Pied Piper ICO on HBO Silicon Valley, she is responsible. Please welcome Jennifer Zhu Scott.
Thank you, Eric. Good afternoon, everyone. I go to speak in a lot of different places in the world, and somehow this Piper ICO always comes to the most people most care about. So I think in the past year or two, we have had a dizzy amount of ICOs and token projects came to our way. In my personal case, we probably received a few hundreds of pitches with the ICOs or token projects. But I often think for those who are in the rabbit hole in the crypto world, and sometimes we lose track, we feel this is the only thing that's happening in the world. So today, with the opening keynote, I'd like to take all of us to a journey, to take a look at what's happening in the history, and then from history to see where we might go in the future. First of all, 1,000 years ago, this is in China, where I come from, and actually in the province I was born and brought up, Sichuan province. 1,000 years ago in Song Dynasty, people at that time were using iron money, which is iron coins are very heavy. To buy a roll of silk, probably you have to carry 25 kilos of iron money to a merchant. So merchants started to issue the first paper money. And those trusted merchants, they started to issue first paper money, and they brought their trading partners to share and use this paper money. And it was quite messy because everybody was issuing their own paper money. And within 10 years, the Song Dynasty imperial government took over and they issued the official paper money. So the world from that time shifted from gold, silver, and metal money to paper money. That was the first time 1,000 years ago. At that time, those paper money has no intrinsic value, and it was building on the trust. Does that sound familiar? Now let's take a look at what's happening in the West. If you think the 20th century is America's century, I think, many people think 21st century is Asia's century, but 20th century, no doubt, is American century. This was in the early 20th century when electricity was invented. When electricity was really driven by the light bulb, right? And using light bulb for illumination, and therefore cables have been laid into every household. Because of that, technology enabled architecture. We see buildings became taller because we have lift. And our technology also enabled lifestyle. We see fridge, people's retail businesses has changed, how they organize their business, organize their life has changed. And again, in the end of the 19th century, oil was used as material for illumination. But in the 19th century, in the beginning of the 20th century, we had a major oil boom in America. And the reason is very simple. This is the actual picture of the Easter celebration parade on Fifth Avenue in New York in 1900. And this is the picture 10 years later. So cars reorganize how our city is designed, and cars also enable this major oil boom. So for all of us who trade cryptocurrency, probably quite familiar with this chart. Can anyone tell me what's this chart? This is a more recent history comparatively. Anyone? This is the dot-com bubble. So from 1999, 2000, there are many companies raised enormous amount of money. And many of those companies, we don't even remember, what did they do and what they actually delivered to the market, other than a website. And those companies went bust very quickly. And the market, had a major crisis. And I think this probably sounds quite familiar too. So I don't think history repeats itself, but history does rhyme. If we think the availability of electricity in the early 20th century, that's comparable to what's happening right now, is the availability of artificial intelligence. Artificial intelligence in 21st century will enable and empower every industry, just like electricity empowered every industry in the 20th century. If oil enabled and fueled the most powerful engine in 20th century, I think big data is the new oil that empower the 21st and most important engines. And just like dot-com bubble, when it burst, it wasn't really end of internet boom. It was the beginning of the internet boom. And I think, in this room, probably most people will agree with me, but in most of the room when I speak, I think right now we are seeing the market. We have been having a bit of bear market, but my personal view is that the bear market is not enough yet, because we need to really see a lot of projects that have nothing underneath to offer, that doesn't really have, deliver valuable utility to the market. We really need to see those projects die out, and then we will start to see a real boom of token economy. So I think this is the beginning. So what is the fundamental shift happening here from the last industrial revolution to this one? The first paradigm shift we are witnessing is that in the last industrial revolution, it's all about allocation of resource of scarcity, right? Labor, capital, land, they're all scarce. But in this run of the Industrial Revolution, our business, everyone's business, the clever and the more successful the business are, the better they're at learning how to allocate resource of abundance. So big data is resource of abundance. The more you use, the more it produces. Renewable energy is resource of abundance. And we're also noticing another paradigm shift, which is from historically, pretty much in our entire human history, exclusive centralization approach in business, in government, in how we organize our society, to now it's a coexist. I don't think it's going to be completely decentralized. It's a coexistence between centralization and decentralization. So, for example, 3D printing will enable people from local manufacturing, even home manufacturing. IoT peer-to-peer sensor will produce most of the data in our AI economy. And blockchain is designed to remove the centralized institution to enable decentralized collaboration without a trust institution. Micro-renewable grids will also enable individuals and small communities to power themselves away from centralized utility suppliers. Zero marginal cost is quite important. Most of us just take it for granted. If you think about today, any individual sitting in the living room with a laptop and with a video, the cost for that individual to reach out to millions of people compared to large media organization or news organization some years ago to reach out millions of people. The individual pretty much spend almost nothing, and the marginal cost is virtually zero for them to reach out millions of people. And this is very important to understand what's really happening here. And also not to underestimate that the computing power became so affordable and so available as well, even for the individual level. So today, at your home, your washing machine has much more powerful computing power compared to Apollo went on the moon. So in the last Industrial Revolution, the society, basically the tension was between liberty and equality. So if you have too much liberty, you have extreme capitalism that is, that produces too much inequality. And if you have only emphasize equality, then you have communism. I grew up in a communist country. It was not fun. And for business, the tensions between efficiency and community, because you have to allocate resources that's scarce. So if you want to have higher profit, you probably will be cheaper for you to pollute. It will be cheaper if you don't look after your labor. And if you only want to take care of the community, then the cost is much higher. So the relationship between business efficiency and communities and the trade-offs relationship. So we talked about that in this industrial revolution. We are able to allocate, and it's important, it's crucial for us to allocate resources of abundance. So the good news is that the efficiency and community are coming together. And more we are seeing a lot of intuitive business leaders. They're very good at finding what the value stands for, what the organization stands for, because that translates into much cheaper marketing cost, that translates into attraction to a young generation of customers. I think some people probably noticed yesterday Nike, with the 30th anniversary, chose a very controversial, in America, chose a quite controversial figure to be the face of the 30th anniversary. It was standing up for something, but also it's a very calculated business decision because their value can translate into differentiation and cheaper marketing because everybody's talking about it. So the bad news is that liberty used to be competing with equality, but right now what we're seeing is that the threat for liberty is from centralized data ownership. And if you think about in the 18th century, how French Revolution happened was because the most important expression of ownership in 18th century was land ownership. The most important expression of ownership in 21st century is about data ownership. And who owns the data? Most of the company owns majority of the data in this world. They're all based not far away from here. And there are a handful of few companies control pretty much everything in our life. And in terms of equality, we used to only have a society that, the most challenging inequality is social and economic. But with DNA enhancement, with genetic enhancement, with embeddable devices into human body, we are going to see biological inequality in our life. So with this combination of some opportunities, a lot of threat, where do you see token economy can play a role? In my view, a few examples, I think, could become quite useful. The first one is because of the community and efficiency start to overlap, I think tokens tokenization process have a great opportunity to align your stakeholders with the business. So traditional financial infrastructure, you have to raise money typically from selling your equity or borrowing against your assets. And that process force you to focus on shareholder value. And a lot of problem with the traditional capitalism, we blame on overly focus on shareholder value. But token economy has the opportunity to focus on stakeholder value. Those tokens building on big data infrastructure, especially enable individual data ownership. We are seeing a lot of protocols. Some of the companies are starting to enable people not only just owning the data and also have the ability to trade data as well. It's still a little bit too early to see who will be the winner in this space, but my personal view is this is going to be a very big space in the next few years. Also, asset-backed tokens, especially asset-backed tokens, enable renewable energy, renewable infrastructure, because traditionally, most of those infrastructure financing, you have to go through so many different layers of funds to get this, access to investing this infrastructure. But now, if there is an infrastructure tokenized, basically investor will be able to participate in this almost semi-automated fundraising process and directly access to those projects. So I think that's a great area as well. And also enable established companies to find hidden value and capacity. The company Eric mentioned, Otoy, which I will talk a little bit more later. Otoy basically using tokens to access, distribute the GPU. And we all know if you consume large amount of GPU, you go to Amazon or Google to buy those cloud GPU, and that's very expensive. So the estimation for a company like Otoy, if they can access, using their token to access, 1% of the global distributed GPUs, which in our pocket right now, everybody has a GPU, and that's not really used, right, in your computer. And if they can access 1% of the distributed GPU in the world, and that's equivalent to about $21 billion worth of infrastructure. So that's very valuable. And also turning sustainability into profit. That's also along the line of what I talk about in terms of the opportunity brought by ability to overlap your value and your efficiency of your business. And also monetize attention economy and authentication. So in the immutability nature of blockchain, I believe one way or another will play a role in terms of the coming challenges of fake news and deep fake. And also, I think the traditional media space is really not prepared for what's coming. The attention is not really based on who's the most authoritative news media anymore. It's really, a lot of time depends on who's louder. And the last example is some of the political applications. This really up to the government to take on the challenge in this space. But I think using blockchain for voting still is an immature space. There are a lot of questions not unanswered yet, but it has the potential. So let's come back to my home country, China. What's happening in China today? And I think, for those who have traveled to China in the recent year or two, you probably will notice that nobody uses cash anymore. So to give you an example that in terms of volume, so 2016 in the US, the online payment volume in the US was about $112 billion, and that's not a small number, but China had 8.6 trillion. And in 2017, Apple Pay really pushed very hard. So the growth in the US was threefold, and in 2017 was 337 billion. Still not a small number, but China has grown to 15.7 trillion. So to give you a concept how big that number is, MasterCard and Visa global volume is about 12 trillion. So China's online payment mostly between the duopoly between Alipay by Alibaba and WeChat by Tencent is much larger than the global Visa, MasterCard all add up together. So my estimation, what's going to happen in China is that China is ripe for completely digital economy. And much like 1,000 years ago when the merchants started to issue their own paper money and the government took over, I think what's going to happen in China quite possibly is the government is going to digitalize RMB. And when PBOC digitalized RMB, there are a lot of socio-economic implications and also geopolitical implications. So, for example, in China, as the economy becomes bigger and bigger, but the government is really struggling to reconcile between the needs of internationalized RMB, but also have capital control. So when you have paper money, it's very difficult to do both. But when you have digitalized currency, you will be able to track every single ins and outflow. So that's number one. Number two, the trade war is happening right now, and as much as people, it's easier. I mean, this is in probably quite liberal state. It's easy to make fun of the current president of the United States lashing out, but it is presenting a lot of threat for China, right? And if China issue digitalized RMB, I think that could potentially bring the biggest threat to the U.S. dollar. So the biggest export in U.S. is actually U.S. dollars. So outside of U.S., there are about 10 trillion U.S. dollar floating in various form. And if China digitalized RMB, then use the digitalized RMB as a trade currency in One Belt, One Road, for example, that will bring serious threat to U.S. dollar. So I think in China, we're going to see quite interesting, unfortunately centralized approach. And this is a year, this is exactly a year after we PBOC cracked down ICO in China. So I think what's happening in China is going to be very, very interesting. And this is a video went viral in social media, but this is exactly with Otoy, the company I'm advising. Also, we invested in this company as render token. In fact, a lot of people ask, the robots is going to take over, but the fact is this is by one artist using a mobile phone shot background and rendered, and most people thought it was a real robot. So this is what already happened, and render token basically will allow people to participate the economic side as well. So lastly, remember when World Wide Web started as, with all the aspiration and intention for decentralization. And this is World Wide Web as of this morning exactly. So the future is already here. It's up to us how we cut it. Thank you very much.